JP Morgan, for those who don't know, essentially it came out that their gold and commodities division has essentially been manipulating the market for years. I believe the years were between 2008 to 2016. And so they've been manipulating the gold and silver markets for the benefit of the bank and its prized clients. And so, yeah, it's essentially three of their former employees. Michael Nowak is the most ambitious that led the effort for years. And they were essentially alleged of trading fraud and accused of racketeering as well. So I think this is a pretty interesting story, right? Because a lot of the things that they say about Bitcoin, they as in the bears, say that it's like a very manipulated market and, gold is this safe haven. Well, now we can even point to this story and show that, even gold is a manipulated market. So there's really no market that's safe.
They call it the Crimex for a reason, not the Comex. Comex is just commodities exchange. But yeah, the Crimex, as in they're criminals and manipulating the price of gold, because if the price of gold isn't low and stable, then that means people will actually wake up to the fact that the dollar is shit. It is the largest shit coin in the world. Probably gold being second on that tier, just to appease Bitcoin maximalists that listen to this. Gold's a shit coin. I might consider buying gold though. I want to get like gold earrings on both ones to say I have shit coins in my ears, just for the lulz. But yeah, when the price of gold breaks out, that demonstrates confidence has been broken in the legacy system. So, I mean, go figure why the shareholders at the Federal Reserve, which are the commercial banks and the 12 regional banks in the country, go figure they're trying to manipulate the price of gold down. So, but yeah, they're bringing that to Bitcoin as well. We have futures markets. I mean, arguably, so silver lining, if you look at the past few weeks, gold and silver, like monetary metals, are kind of like breaking down a little bit, because I do think that you have capital flight leaving Europe because they're basically like castrating themselves over there on purpose to have their like Panopticon Davos, CBDC issued by the IMF dystopia thing. But you have capital flight, they're going to safe haven assets. So that's going to be your 10-year treasuries and the Dow, but of course gold and silver. And you would think Bitcoin as well. But if you look in the past few weeks, gold and silver have kind of crept up, broken out a little bit. And I think that's going to continue as we have interest rates keep going up. People, of course, go to where money's going to be treated best. But you would think that Bitcoin breaks out as well. So is there no interest in Bitcoin? Like, why is the volatility so low? And we had recently this week BlackRock partnering with Coinbase. Was it Coinbase or Circle?
Yeah, it was Coinbase.
Yeah. And just offering more, because of the market demand, more Bitcoin products, because they don't have to. But I think like the futures market manipulation of gold, that's coming over to Bitcoin. And so they're trying to hold the price down. And arguably, I mean, people like Magoo and others on Twitter say, hey, we're going to see 12K. Let's go. That might even happen. And so I think it's with these fiat instruments to manipulate markets, the powers that be want to scoop up as much corn as possible.
No, I definitely get that too. But what is the benefit of JP Morgan, other than obviously trading on the price? I think that there's some other incentives here about manipulating the price of gold. So why don't you get into that? Like, what are some of the potential incentives of not just JP Morgan, but, some of the other powers that be for manipulating this gold price?
Yeah. And I might be just reading off what we're going to publish next week a little bit. And I just kind of like pulled this out of my ass like less than 24 hours ago. But essentially, as I referred to them as Davos earlier, and I mean, people hear this term, the Davos crowd, just think old money, as I said, old money, European, Malthusian oligarchs that basically want their colonies back, commies. Did I say eugenicists already? I don't know if I did. Klaus Schwab, World Economic Forum, all those guys. And they essentially run the ECB. ECB is the central bank, European Central Bank. And they have no assets and they can go bankrupt. And with Basel III, Basel is basically where the central banks decide, how they're going to basically like back themselves whether it's like commodities or how much gold ratio to credit, whatever the case might be. Basel III, and I'm paraphrasing, so if I get off track, just let me know. But basically, Basel III is going to enable all the credit denominated gold, like paper gold that ECB has, basically say, hey, that's going to count as your gold reserves because the ECB is desperate to be solvent. So I'll just leave it at that there as I look more into the article that I wrote. But I mean, when I first sent you this, like, what were your initial thoughts and questions? Because I mean, I'm sure the same questions that you might have may be the questions that the audience has.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, it just from like the perspective of just the average person, the average Bitcoiner, I would say, right, is the biggest argument that has been made that I have heard is that, gold is this hard, sound money, that, it's always going to be exchangeable. And, you always hear the Bitcoin versus gold argument. And a lot of the
Yeah.
even maxis compare it to digital gold, right? So, I think that there's, this new, like, the new Basel III that you kind of mentioned in this article. And so I don't know if I'm giving it away, the entire article that we're going to publish
I
here.
mean, fuck it, like we can. So
Yeah.
let me just like give a little bit of premise, like what Davos's like main motivations are right
Okay.
here. So Davos wants to destroy the American economy by forcing Congress and the Fed to deficit spend the U.S. into oblivion. And the replacement of the current monetary system would be a new globalist one that's based on IMF-backed central bank digital currency. And so Europe wants this model to be put into place because the ECB can and eventually will, because that's their intention, to go bankrupt. They liquidate themselves, kind of like the George Soros thing with the pound, but they liquidate themselves and basically give up. IMF is going to control this ride. So this is intended by Davos, and they wanted first, though, destroy America's economy before they fail in order to prevent capital flight out of Europe and have the capital flight leave America and come back into Europe. So it's kind of like a race to the bottom, who can knock each other out first. And that's why Powell, and I'll probably get into one of these later articles, but that's why Powell has been arguably doing stealth quantitative tightening since June 2021, so last June FOMC meeting, and has been able to raise rates and re-indexing their debt to SOFR instead of LIBOR. So basically, why manipulate the price of gold down? So back to gold, Davos needs the gold price to be high so they can use their manipulated paper gold holdings as collateral. That is what Basel III allows them to do. So one could argue that gold traders at JP Morgan and most likely other banks, right, because all the shareholders of the Fed, other banks are manipulating the price of gold to the downside to keep confidence, as I already mentioned earlier, in the dollar dominant, and keep the confidence high in the overall current financial system. So Davos needs gold prices to be high so that individual countries, literally within Europe, become more solvent, which takes some pressure off their government bonds, because we've seen recently, Christine Lagarde and her ilk had to sell off German bonds to help support Greece. Because remember, they don't have assets. They can go bankrupt. It's almost like the fixed supply of Bitcoin. They have a fixed supply of shitty debt instruments that they like shuffle and like sell off and buy back to like keep the countries afloat. Which, I mean, this is only one part of what's causing like these national populistic like uprisings. There's a video that I shared by some guy on BitChute, but basically did kind of like a political breakdown of Italy basically being one of these European countries that are shown to be sovereign and leading the way against these globalist agenda, which is amazing. And you have these farmer uprisings all throughout Europe as well. So, of course, fix the money, fix the world. Once you fix the money and the financial plumbing, you won't have all this chaos amongst society. But so let me see here. And there's a report that I found too that's going to be included in that article. But basically, to keep afloat in the EC in Europe and solvent, ECB may have to use Basel III to save their asses. All right. So the new rules Basel III would basically sound like this. In layman's terms, under Basel III, Europe's unallocated gold reserves would be replaced by their paper holdings, which is what Davos mostly has, via the ability to print infinite money via the offshore dollar market, or ODM, as I like to call. And if you want to do kind of a deep dive course of euro dollars, offshore dollar market, they're synonymous. It has nothing to do with the actual euro. Of course, Jeff Snyder is a solid source for that too. But going back to things in layman's terms, it's basically saying, oh, hey, ECB, you don't have enough gold. No worries, bro. Just use those paper holdings that you have, and those are going to count as your balance sheet collateral. And so Davos needs this to happen because they're, as I said, basically bankrupt. Otherwise, if they don't, then the ECB simply, that is why the ECB needs gold prices to be higher. And that's why the Fed needs them to be lower, right? On the flip side, a higher gold price would undermine the Fed's power and credibility. So that's why JP Morgan and Team Fed, as I call Team Fed, just being the commercial banks and regional banks, have been manipulating the gold price. And so to me, at the end of the day, this is kind of like this whole JP Morgan scandal is a hit piece. All three of those dudes were acquitted, right? And this is kind of like a flashback to earlier in the year. Maybe it was late last year, but when they tried to take out Powell for insider trading, they got two of the Fed chairman, but not Powell. And then they had to postpone his reconfirmation as Fed chair for 6 months. And I think this is just another example of, there are competing factions and interests of the elites. And it's only in our best interest that we be on the team of the bankers on Wall Street that we hate. But I'd rather go with those guys who are actually maybe looking into building the next monetary system on top of Bitcoin, which people listening probably want to shoot themselves in the head right now because that just sounds fucking idiotic. But we had reports a few weeks ago from the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland and St. Louis saying Bitcoin Lightning Network as money is more efficient than Fedwire, and how it's green and good for the environment or whatever. Could those have just been academic papers and grants or whatever to appease voter base? I don't know. But regardless, I think there are sovereigntists within America at the high echelons of power that don't want to go along for the ride of globalism. Because if you have a CBDC issue from the IMF that the Federal Reserve has to follow the IMF's like diktat, so like from the IMF to the Fed to your pocket, you get rid of the commercial banks, which is the largest lobbying institution in the world. So, I mean, the banks and the credit creation, that's like what the Fed needs to survive. And you get rid of the whole Federal Reserve System banking cartel. And I mean, basically it's Jamie Dimon and Klaus Schwab like butting heads saying like, no, fuck you. Like I want this like monopoly, like money power. Like you go do your Panopticon, like Euro, whatever plaything over there. But don't tase me, bro. Don't take my banks, bro. And that's really just objectively reading in between the lines and also hearing things what Tom says and people in the legacy system, like on a Slack server, being able to have conversations with them, reading in between the lines, like what people like Daniel DiMartina Booth are talking about. Like she retweeted one of my threads where I'm talking about this like a month ago. And so if that's just not like a nail in the coffin of there is something else going on here and there's nuance within the power elites, then I don't know what is.